Right. Welcome, everyone. Wow. It's amazing how many people are pouring in right now here on Zoom and also tuning in to the YouTube live stream. So welcome wherever you're tuning in from. We are here to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of Reinventing Organizations. And before I say any more about the event, as one of your hosts, I'm Lisa, by the way, I'll introduce the rest of the hosting team in a moment. But let me hand over to the guest of honor, Frederic Laloux, the author himself. Frederic, what would you like to say to your party guests?
That I'm so excited. You might know this or not know this, but I don't really know what's going to happen because that was the whole idea, to make this a bit of a surprise for me as it's for everyone else. Because early on, as we were talking about this, um, the idea was that we really wanted to highlight everyone that was part of this adventure over the last 10 years, because you might know this or not know this, but I'm not a natural self-promoter at all. I'm not a natural marketer. And so the fact that this book has had this incredible success and that these ideas have reached so many people is really all down to all of you, like everyone who talked about the book, who shared, actually maybe we can do a show of hands, like who of you has, talked about the book to at least, one person, right? I mean, that's how this whole thing, who of you has given away a copy of the book, right? So this is how this spread, because if it had been down to me, not many people would have read it, and so yeah, that's how we came up to this idea of, like, let's not, focus so much on me or the book, but let's rather highlight everyone who's been part of this adventure, and see how it has affected all of us in different ways. Obviously, it's affected me over the last 10 years. It's been an amazing adventure, but like so many organizations have been impacted, and hence the idea that we would make this a celebration rather than sort of a traditional webinar, and that in part I will be as surprised as you, with the flow of the event.
Thanks, Fred. Yeah, so I feel like I feel a bit mischievous and like I have some power because I know what's about to happen and Fred knows very little. Um, so let me say something about what to expect today, and also about the hosting team. So I'm one of the facilitator hosts today, and with me also is Rhea, who some of you may know if you've ever been to one of the Teal Around the World conferences. So Rhea will be facilitating as well. And we also have two tech hosts. We have Catalina and we have Elena. And so some kind of housekeeping things to say are that because we're a very small hosting team, we won't be able to keep track of the chat if you're joining us in Zoom, and we won't be able to keep track of the chat very well in YouTube either if you're joining via live stream. So we really encourage you to help each other. If you see someone struggling with something, they're struggling with a link or something, help each other out. That's what this community is great at doing. And we're also going to have closed captions on so that you'll be able to see those in the YouTube version. And we know that many of you, English is not your native language, so it's the language that we're going to be using today, and that might be limiting for some of you. We acknowledge that, and at the same time, it's hopefully a language that brings us all together here. And two kind of technical things, which is that if you are joining the Zoom, then we are assuming that you want to be part of breakout rooms. There are going to be 2 moments of interactive breakout rooms where we will put you into a room with 3 or so people. So if you do not want to do that, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, or you're not able to do that because you're, I don't know, driving or something, then it's probably better that you join the YouTube live stream where you'll still be able to follow everything. You just won't be put into a breakout room. Or it should work out enough that when people are in breakout rooms, there'll be enough people that even if like 1 or 2 of you don't want to join, then the other 2 will still be able to have a nice chat. Anything else housekeeping? I think that's most things housekeeping wise. So let me share a bit about the flow briefly, so that you have something to hang on to. So if I share my screen here. So the flow of today is going to be kind of in three parts. So the first part is kind of looking back on the last 10 years and celebrating the milestones along the way. We'll have a chance in breakout rooms to reflect and to talk a little bit about how the book has influenced each of us. And then we have some special guests who are joining us, who are going to share their stories, little bite-sized stories. So that's kind of part one, looking back. And then we're going to have a part which is reflecting on this moment, like the present. Where are we now in this movement? And there we will have a conversation with Frederic, where Rhea will ask him some questions to get us started, and you'll have a chance to submit your questions that you would like to ask him and vote for the ones that you like. So there'll be some chance to interact there as well. And then as we kind of move towards the third phase of the event, we'll be sensing into the future. So I think it's a really beautiful opportunity that we have all of these people together in this moment. Maybe we've never had this many people actually all together at the same time. So let's see what we can sense into together, what feels like the next phase of the next evolution of this journey, because we are the ones who make that, right? That's what's been the case so far. So we'll be doing a little bit of looking to the future. We'll have some interactive elements there as well. And then we'll have a final kind of celebration and closing out. So that's the plan. So every time I want to stop sharing my screen, it won't let me. Here we go. So we have a little Menti here. Anyone used Menti before? So let me present this here in the screen. So if you're joining in Zoom or if you're joining in the YouTube live stream, you'll be able to participate in this. So you can either, if you're in Zoom, I think you can click on it, but otherwise you can just go to menti.com. We're also pasting it in the chat, and you can type in that code and place a pin. I know it's a very small map, so it's not going to be super accurate, but just so we can get a broad sense. Where in the world are you joining us from today? And we'll start to see all these dots kind of popping up. There we go. Wonderful. Yeah, Europe is pretty small, so you just put a general blob somewhere. Yeah, and shout out to our, wow, there are some people in Southeast Asia. I'm impressed because it's got to be very late where you are, because we won't have many people from Australia or New Zealand joining because it's not a good time for them. But they're going to be watching this and having their own events, I hope. Fun. So a second thing, which is a little bit in the vein of what Frederic was starting to do, actually, I thought it would be fun to see what kinds of interactions you've had with the movement so far. So if I skip forward now a slide, so sorry if you didn't get a chance to put your pin there. Now you should be able to choose which of these statements applies to you. So after reading Reinventing Organizations, I quit my job. Anyone quit their job? Maybe you adopted teal practices or principles in your team, in your organization. Did you participate in a Reinventing Organizations project like the Wiki or the Teal Around the World conference or Teal Village? Did you start something, a company, an initiative? Did you join a Teal network or community? Were you one of the translators? Did you write a book? Did you do something else? Look at that. Wow. Amazing. Yeah, we have a special place later on that will show you where we have captured some of the many books that have been written that have been inspired by Reinventing Organizations. Wow, a lot of people quit their jobs. Great, good for you. Okay, so let me stop there. Great, so we'll come back to that Menti a little bit later as well. But I wanted to, the final thing that I'll say before we move into a breakout room moment is looking back at the timeline of all the things that have happened over the last 10 years. And even just looking at the kind of global movement things that have happened in terms of reinventing organizations, it's pretty impressive. So let me do a bit of a whirlwind tour. So those of you perhaps who read the book later on may not be aware of some of these projects that happened. So very briefly then, some milestones. So of course the book came out 10 years ago, February 2014, the first version of the book. And as Frederic said, it spread by word of mouth. It was a real phenomenon, which was amazing. And it got translated into all these different languages, which, and here is a key theme in this movement, was all teams of volunteers, right, Frederic? It was people who volunteered and said, do you have it in Japanese? And Frederic encouraged them, no, but do you want to do the translation? And look at all of these translations that have happened. And then in April 2014, we had the Discourse platform launch. So I don't know, maybe put your hand up. Did you join that? Anyone become a member of the Discourse platform? There were places where you could ask questions, share advice. I think it was very active in the beginning, not so much lately, but there's still some people on there these days. So that was really fun. And then in July 2015, Enlivening Edge launched. So a small team of volunteers got together, created the first teal newsletter magazine, Next Stage Organizations News. And I think today they have like thousands of articles by 200 authors. 21 different partners have worked on it at one time or another. So they've been a real companion project alongside the book. And that same month, the first Reinventing Organizations wiki launched. So maybe raise of hands, anyone join the wiki, anyone in that project? Yeah, Frederic, of course. And this, I got this from Internet Archive. This is what it looked like, I think, more or less, when it first launched. So that was a rough version of it. And amazing people came together from all over the world to kind of write the articles in true wiki style. And then in November 2015, Frederic decided he wanted to release an illustrated version of the book. And I think you wanted some help encouraging you to get over the finish line, didn't you, Frederic? Because it was a bit lonely. So we created this crowdfunding campaign, and I was the little perk fairy. So I was the one, if any of you donated, who was typing all the addresses manually into a spreadsheet to ship off the books. And I think about 400 or 500 people contributed to the campaign. 30 people gave feedback on the book. And then it launched in June 2016 and was translated into many languages again. Same thing, volunteers translating it. And then in November 2018, the Insights for the Journey video series. And if any of you listening to this now, if any of you have not seen these, this is like a gold mine of like 130, I think, different insights, short videos, 20 hours of content. And pretty much any question you have or anyone has, I think Frederic's probably answered it here somewhere. So that's an amazing treasure trove of insights. And then in March 2020, the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we had the first Teal Around the World conference. So I think the first time where people from all kinds of continents got together. Blok there was one of the speakers. So you'll recognize him from the Buurtzorg case in the book. So that was a really special event. And then in June 2020, the week is announced by Frederic and Helene. And maybe Frederic can say something a bit more about that later. I think there'll be an opportunity. But that was in the face of the climate crisis and how to engage with that, another passion project. And then we had the refreshed wiki. So again, another team of volunteers getting together, improving, adding more examples, case studies. It's a really beautiful, useful resource. And then here we are, present day. So I told you it was a whistle-stop tour. And we have all kinds of live events happening right now in person. So we have events in Berlin, Germany, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, Malmö, Sweden, Padova, Italy, Sao Paulo, Brazil. So hello to all of our friends who are celebrating in person today. So let me stop sharing my screen now. Here we go. So at that moment then, let's have an opportunity to reflect a little bit. So we have a reflection question that we want to share with you, and we're going to give you like a minute to individually reflect. And then we want you to, so we're going to paste this in the chat. So you can take some notes if you want, or you can just sit for a moment with your thoughts. And the reflection question is, if there is one way in particular the book has shifted your perspective, what is it? So how has the book, Reinventing Organizations, shifted your perspective when you look back? So I'm going to be silent for a minute to give you some time to gather your thoughts before you get to share them with someone. I can also put it up on the screen here. Okay, so Eleanor has the challenging task of creating breakout rooms, even as people pop in into the Zoom here. So we're gonna, in a moment, open some breakout rooms, and you'll be whisked into a space with 3 or so other human beings, and you'll have 10 minutes. You'll see a countdown timer, and you'll have 10 minutes to share. So you can choose, if I click on here, so you can choose one thing, and make sure each person gets a chance to share something. And to our friends in the YouTube live stream, I'm going to leave this on my screen so you can put us on mute, and you can go into your groups in person and you can discuss the same reflection question. And when I take this slide down, you'll know that it's time to take us off mute and join us again. So, Eleanor, are we ready with the breakout rooms? Yes, she is the queen of breakouts. I hope you had a nice chat with some friends there. I can see some smiling faces. So let's move into our next section. So we thought it would be a good opportunity to showcase, to sort of pick a couple of stories to hear in the main room here for everyone as well. And we could have chosen from like 1,000 different stories, but we narrowed it down to 3. So we have now a little kind of speed dating almost section of stories where we'll have 3 stories, 10 minutes each, more or less. And the first one who is going to share their story is Tonny Wamboga from SINA, which is the Social Innovation Academy in Uganda. Hi, Tonny. Nice to see you again.
Nice to meet you, Lisa.
So I had Tonny on my podcast earlier this year, and I think SINA's story is a really inspiring one. It's an example of an organization that is using self-management and teaching it to young people as a way of giving them more agency and empowering them to become entrepreneurs, and it's spreading all over the country. They just won the Zero Distance Award in Qingdao, China, just earlier this month, I think, or last month. So yeah, let me leave it there, and I will hand over to you, Tonny, because I want to give you the floor to share some reflections and highlights for you in your journey with self-management and Teal principles. So over to you, Tonny. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for giving us this opportunity. Hello, in Uganda, it's evening, so greetings, everyone. I'm Tonny Wamboga from Uganda. I've been part of the Social Innovation Academy since 2016. When was still at the initial stages, my personal experience with especially power. There are so many interesting stories, but I have one I would like to share here. When I dropped out of high school, I joined the maize mill. In Uganda, we eat out of posho, that's smashed maize. And I was working in this mill to earn some income. And the boss there was a family business. One of the evenings, I and my colleagues, we had worked an entire night. And we began milling at around 8 p.m. and the milling went on until 5:30 a.m. So one of the colleagues I was working with got really exhausted, and he asked us, because we were a team of 5, that if he could take a nap of 10 minutes, and we could give him cover. Now, unfortunately, during those 10 minutes, the boss walks in. He woke up early morning to come and check on us, and he found him sleeping. And unfortunately, that's how he lost his job. We tried to explain that he has worked an entire night, but the boss had made the call. So that's where my journey begins. I left the maize mill and I joined the Social Innovation Academy, which is tackling the unfailing education and resulting unemployment in Uganda through creating self-organized and responsible learning spaces. When I arrived here, I had come from a hierarchy system. I knew that I have to be told what to do and I have to conform. I go by what my boss says. My school system here in Uganda informs us that when the teacher tells you to do something, that's what you do. Even our parents sometimes, most of the students in schools, if you ask them, what do you want to do or what do you want to be in future? Most of the answers they will give you are answers that they have been told, either by teachers or by their parents. And oftentimes the people who tell them those, especially traditional careers, they don't allow them to express or share what they want to be on, who they want to be, what are their desires, what are their aspirations. And here at SINA, we do it differently. With Reinventing Organizations book, we learned that there are other ways. We appreciate that hierarchy has come so far and has achieved a lot of things. But so much has changed in the world. We are evolving, we are changing. Now you look at AI. We should also think about how management is being done. And there are ways we can better and improve and hold perspectives about work and humans at work that are different from what the hierarchy system offers us. One of the principles we embraced from the Reinventing Organizations book is wholeness. We ask our scholars to come with their vulnerabilities, with their emotions, express themselves, and we support each other as a community. We don't say, please pretend, give us an impression of who you really aren't, but rather show up wholly as you are, and we can together navigate this path, supporting each other. So that's really one big shift here. All the work that happens within the organization has been broken down into small roles, and each role makes autonomous decisions. So if you're in charge of water, that's your space. You will inform us how much water do we have in storage, how much do we need to run for a month, which resources do we need, and you inform us, and we will listen to you and respect that. Once you come into my space, I am in charge of finance. I will also guide you on how you can access resources. How do you push in your requisitions? You need to account for funds, and we will respect that. So through breaking down roles, we allow scholars to experience what self-organization is. They are creative. We encourage them. If you come in, you're new, we know you will struggle, and we'll support you on this journey. You make mistakes, we'll support you, learn from those mistakes, and become a better human being. So that way, we have been able to support scholars. One, build skills, but also experience what is self-organization. Are there other systems besides the hierarchy that we know about and we have grown up seeing of management that we can embrace and adapt? So most of our entrepreneurs, once they start businesses, instead of going for hierarchy systems of management, they are opting for self-organization, which is something we are really happy and celebrate that the Reinventing Organizations book has taught us. At the moment, SINA is already in various locations. In Uganda, we are in 8 locations, but now we have replications in Zimbabwe, in Tanzania, in Kenya, and right now we have scholars who are here and they are replicating. They're taking the model to Nigeria and Nepal. So that's how we are doing our part in spreading what we have learned and what we have experienced with reinventing organizations. The other part that I would like to talk about is that as humans, when you work with other adults, how do you look at them? Do you look at them as people, or do you see them as machines that have come? They don't think, they don't have emotions. They just need to come and appear a certain way and get work done. What we believe in is that once you are working with us or you join the academy, it is a partnership. We are working together. You bring your creativity, your vulnerability, and we accept that, we welcome that. We have an organizational purpose that we all contribute to. So it's symbiosis. You support us, you support the organization, and also the organization supports you to grow and achieve your goals. Last time on the podcast, when we were discussing with Lisa, we talked about obedience. Most of the scholars that we have within our organization, the youth that we support, are coming from a system that informs them that they need to be obedient. You have to do as you are told. And they really struggle to shift from being obedient to really thinking for themselves and driving their ideas, their purpose, their goals forward. When they come in here, we hold each other accountable. We say we must be able to build our capacity to be leaders and followers at the same time. There are moments in life that require us to step back and listen to other people, allow them to express themselves, communicate their ideas. And then there are moments where then it is upon us to share our ideas, communicate our goals, and ask people to join us or to give their input. So that part of leader and follower, some scholars believe that they were born to be leaders. The bosses, they are the ones who have to be at the top, instructing others, commanding others to do things after what they want or desire. And then there are others who believe they just need to be obedient. They need someone who is ahead of them, instructing them to do things, and they are comfortable there. But when they come into our space, we challenge each one of those profiles to get out of their comfort zone. One who says, I am a leader, this is where I want to be, I am a boss. We say, step back, be led. It is very uncomfortable. But at the same time, the person who is comfortable to follow, we challenge them to lead, to take responsibility. And it is interesting to see the dynamics And over time, we all learn and grow and improve together as a community. So that is how we are doing empowerment as SINA. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I am really privileged to speak to all of you, and hopefully we get time to connect further and share.
Can't hear you, Rhea.
Thank you. Tony, thank you so much for sharing your story, and how inspiring is it, your vision for the community and what you have already created for the world, especially in Africa. It's a privilege to watch that grow as a movement. And also really inspiring to see how self-organization has made such an impact to your organization as well. So we are moving on to our next storyteller, who is very near and dear to me. So I met Kelly in Amsterdam when I was working there in the past. And her leadership has been a tremendous part of who I am today. So I'm very grateful for that. And she showed me reinventing organizations, actually, and how it's lived in large organizations. It's just going to inspire us today. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I had a few slides to share, but it doesn't seem that I can do that. So I guess I'll just look at my slides and talk to you about them. But I am so grateful for this community and for all of you. And every time that Rhea has ever asked me to come and talk about Niaga or talk about the things that we've learned together, I do it selfishly because I love to share what we learned, but I love more taking away all of everyone else's good examples. So I really appreciate the book most because I think throughout my career, I was naturally a person who wanted to collaborate and wanted to bring people together. And I often felt stuck in the paradigms of the matrix organizations or the big hierarchical, big people and little people world. And a lot of you might recognize your own feelings when you're in this bigger culture and you're creating a different environment for your own department or your own team. But in order to do that, you have to hold the tension between the culture you're experiencing and the culture you're creating. And that really puts leaders in a wonderful but awkward position. And when I went to the Netherlands to work with the Niaga team, I was brought in specifically because they had this tremendous purpose and this big idea and these really talented people. But the organization itself was sort of failing because the people didn't get along. They had amassed this really incredible group of extremely talented people, but they really had stopped hearing each other and seeing each other and feeling each other. So I came in very gratefully to take 100 projects and find the 3 that mattered and to try to reconnect the people who had already had a coach for 6 months. They'd already poured their hearts out trying to make things better and nothing changed. So they were extremely skeptical when I joined the organization that we would ever really get along and make things happen. Immediately when I showed up in the team, I spent time with every person. There were only about 20 of us at the time. And I invited everybody to come to a meeting to talk about the culture, talk about trust, and talk about these 100 things they were trying to do so we could really pick a few things to finish. And it was a crazy workshop because a lot of them just sat there and looked at me like, why am I here? No one has ever wanted to hear what I have to say. I'm a lab technician or I'm an operator in the production plant. Like, why do I have to take 2 or 3 days to sit around a table when no one's ever wanted to hear from me? And I was like, just gave them the same promise I've given to every team for 25 years, which is to the best of my ability, things are going to happen to you, to happen with you and not to you. So that's always been very important to me. But it was when people really started believing that, it had to come through our actions. I couldn't just say that. I had to show them that I wanted to hear from you, that when you use your voice, you'll be heard, that we'll create ways to make sure the introverts and the extroverts get to put their ideas on the table. And so one example of that is we started having cards that people had to share their ideas. So if one person was presenting, everybody was actively engaged with these 3 cards that they had sitting in front of them that said, I like these things about what you're saying. I want to challenge this thing you're saying, or I could help you with these ideas. And just having that active listening and that active participation sort of leveled the playing field between the extroverts and the introverts on the team. And then it was their job to give those cards as a gift to the person that was presenting. So they got feedback from 20 people instead of 1 or 2 who had the courage to ask questions. And we were already kind of working this way, just sort of naturally, because I've always liked bringing people together. But it was only after we were in one of our workshops and I put up the org structure that like came out of success factors or whatever system they were using. And the team looked at this org chart with the traditional layers and they said, wait a minute, like, thank you for sharing that with me. I've never seen it before, but that doesn't really feel like us. And we were a circular economy innovation venture. So our job was to challenge the way that things are being built and produced and redesign them up front so that all of the materials could be recovered and reused at the end of life. So we had this team of innovators and chemists and engineers who were trying to use science and trying to use production techniques to change really big, bulky waste categories like carpets and mattresses and furniture to make sure that these things that people spend more than 100 billion euros a year on are not going to landfill or incineration anymore. So we had this tremendous purpose and this tremendous reason why people were coming together to solve some of the world's biggest problems. But they really weren't working from their full capability and capacity as adults around the table. You know, just like Tony said, we had that issue of people's stories stuck in their head that you're important and I'm not, you're big and I'm small. I'm just supposed to sit in my lab bench and do these things like I have for the last 10 years and it's just fine. But we had the team themselves react to that org chart by saying, that's nice to see, but that doesn't feel like us. What if we could change our own organization, our own structure to make it circular, just like our dreams? We're trying to invent a circular economy and prove it, and yet that doesn't really fit, does it? And so we headed down this path of creating a sub-team to shape our structure, and we got the Reinventing Organizations books, we got Holacracy and Sociocracy, and started reading, and we formed a sub-team to shape our organization. And the picture that I can't show you right now is a circle, because we created a circular organization that had very clear teams, very different responsibilities between people creating markets, people in functional disciplines, and then a source team that was not a management team. It was me and a controller and the founder, and then one member from each team. And each team also got a coach to help support, helping enable them to see each other as the 24 hours a day equal adults that we really are. And Rhea was one of the coaches. So that was really wonderful to get to learn from her experience with agile ways of working and an IT background and stuff. We had 6 or 7 coaches that all had really different backgrounds, and they were there to hold the teams and support them while we were going through this transition. And one of the stories I want to build on that I agree with Tony is we had people who were so locked into their stories about who they were and needing to manage people and needing to delegate. And so when you go to a self-directed structure and you get rid of the hierarchy and you create this equality and the teams are responsible for outcomes, it was a very funny conversation once in a while. And I'll take an example of a woman who was in her 60s, love her. And we created this organization and she was in her team and we had a coaching session and she said, Kelly, I just don't think I can dumb it down anymore. Like, we want to be equal, but in order for me to be equal with those people, I got to dumb it down. I got to meet them down there. And I was like, wow, like maybe since you have all this leadership experience and all this people management experience, 30 years into your career, maybe your job is not to dumb it down, but to help them find their wings, help them get stronger, help them see their gifts, help them realize their talents. Like, you don't have to let go of your leadership skills just because we're going to treat each other as the equal adults that we are. And it was just really fascinating to experience the power of the stories we have about who we are, but also who we need other people to be to feel safe and to feel effective. And one of the biggest changes that I recognize is, I'm running out of time quickly, but I'll say one more thing about my own leadership in that space. I loved making decisions. I loved being responsible for things. And when my job went from as CEO, the old way that I'm supposed to have all this power, to really being a head coach, I didn't make any decisions anymore, even though I love making decisions. And it turns out that the times I added the most value was when the diversity created chaos and people got angry at each other. It was my job to come in and reconnect them, to restore and rebuild the trust, to repair the pain. And that was the most important responsibility of the more experienced leaders, was to repair and restore and create, just protect that psychological safety. And so it's been a pleasure. I wish I could talk to you all day, but my story time is up.
Kelly, that's always inspiring, and it's nice to relive those moments when we were working together at Niaga with all the teams. It's just such a beautiful story that I keep coming back to time and time again. So now we're ready for our third storyteller, and this duo need no introduction. You all of you who has read the book has probably met their story, and I would like to welcome the father and son duo together with the lovely Mrs. as they share the story of Buurtzorg. Speaking of making the story from the book come alive, you have them here live on Zoom. Jos and Thijs, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ria. I am the past, so I will start. We are sitting here on a bed in a hotel in Estonia, in Tallinn, thanks to Frederic, because there is a conference here on sustainability, and there were 5,000 people on this conference who want to learn from Buurtzorg and from the ideas about reinventing organizations. I would like to start with some personal things. When Frederic visited me in 2013, and we were sitting quite long talking about all kind of things. I don't remember exactly the details, but what I remember is the calmness of Frederic in observing what's happening. And one of the things he said is, you didn't have one call during our meeting we had for hours. I said, no, of course not. Why should I? So he said, yeah, because a lot of people who are leaders, they're always under pressure. And I think this is one of the things that I always thought. I'm a nurse there, I'm background as a nurse, that we put far too much pressure on each other and in organizations. And it's usually caused, I think, by this hierarchy and this idea that management is the only way to manage organizations. When I talked with Frederic and he was talking about his theories and the other organizations that he met, I felt a few things. One, we're on the right track. That was one. And two, there are lots of other people who have similar ideas all over the world. And we are part of a movement that we are trying to find out to get rid of these, I think, painful and stressful structures we build. And I think we are in the middle of a big transition. And I think that for me, the biggest value of this book is that it helps people in making a transition from a kind of an old and world which is caused by the Industrial Revolution to a new world that should be based more on humanity. And every time that I'm asked for visit an organization and give my advice, I've been to SAP and we had a meeting with Bayer where you're involved, Ria. But it's always a bit the same. there are some people with a vision and they want to change. And then you have a lot of people who have also an advantage by keeping the structure as it is. And I hope that this book will keep on contributing to help these people to bring new insights to the people who are struggling and to make this movement bigger and bigger. And it's happening. We are all part of it and we see it around us. And as I said, I am the best. I will retire the coming year. Thijs and my other son, Joost, are taking over. So Joost is the youngest one. He's not here yet, but he's my co-CEO now. And Thijs is doing all the international activities and also is director of Buurtzorg. So I hand it over to the future. And Thijs, what do you want to add to what your old father is saying here?
No, thank you. And I think a lot of things has happened since the book has come out in the past 10 years. We went from a Dutch home healthcare organization to a trailblazer for self-management without ever actively asking for that role. So there's phone calls coming in and emails from all around the world saying, oh, we want to learn what you're doing. And a lot of the teams, because a lot of people have visited throughout the years, some of you in this event today have probably also visited. And I take them to see teams, and the teams are always still these days in the same position. Why do they want to see how we do our job? Because everything what we do is logical. And I say it's exactly that. Everything what you do is logical and it's based on logical principles. And that's also the way I was raised by my parents. They got me in trouble sometimes because I wouldn't do things because they were unlogical. And now it's been picked up in the past years also by business schools. So the fact that we are here today with such a big group, there's a critical mass that is asking for a change in how we view organizations. So Harvard Business School wrote a case study about Buurtzorg, and they asked me to be a protagonist at Harvard. And the first thing I said, it's nice that there's an institute where people can learn about traditional ways of management, but I think that should also be a rehabilitation clinic for people where they can forget about traditional ways of management. And it's received with a bit of laughter, but I think the book Reinventing Organizations is a good step for people that have been educated in a traditional way of management to look at things from another perspective, and in a very methodical way explains how change is achieved. And those are still things that we are working on today, particularly in healthcare, but also in other fields around the world. So the future and the past, and probably there will be another future after me, I hope. And this way of working keeps evolving, but our dream is that this becomes the most logical and most standard way for people to practice their jobs all around the world. And that's also why I joined Buurtzorg. So yeah, that's in a nutshell what I think of it.
Very nice to hear the evolution and how Buurtzorg is constantly reinventing itself, right? And repositioning itself and the impact to the world.
And Ria, I forgot one thing to say.
Please.
The woman beside me is my wife, and it's Michelle. And she started with Buurtzorg in the US in 2013. And it existed for 5 years there. So, but America is a very difficult country.
Maybe an idea for Frederic for his new book, Reinvent America.
Very, very good suggestion. Well, Thijs, Jos, thank you for sharing your journey and sharing that with us and inspiring all of us. So, you know, we've heard the stories come alive coming out of a book that has connected all of us here and also connected the people who are now partying all over Berlin and Malmo. So shout out to the people on live stream. I want to welcome Frederic for a conversation. And Frederic, maybe coming into this call and also knowing that there's at the back of this Zoom call is a number of live streams all over Europe and some other parts of the world, I know. How do you feel coming into this conversation? And to your birthday party?
To be honest, it feels surreal. I was so touched by the various, intervention, Tonny and Kelly and Yosentes and just so many stories I don't even know, have happened and so many people I've met, many in the room here, some of whom have become, dear friends and so, I mean, my life was definitely changed by that book. It was never something I expected. So yeah, it feels surreal. Like I know that on a day-to-day basis, I keep forgetting, that the book has had this sort of impact. And then I hear a story like this and I go like, oh yeah, that's right. So yeah, I just feel very, very touched and honored to be here.
Very cool. Frederic, maybe I'm curious, what surprised you the most? When people give you a feedback, or maybe you read something online about their reaction to the book, or maybe just some of those stories that we've heard now or on the chat today. Anything that comes out as very surprising for you?
I don't know if it's surprising, but like the thing I keep hearing over and over again, like really from the first day when, and it might apply to some of you, was people saying, in some ways, deep down, I knew all of this. Some ways deep down, I intuited all of this. But to see it actually, on paper, see that there's organizations who do this was like such a liberation. And so many people, or another version of this is people saying, I felt like the only crazy person who was thinking this, and now I realize like there's so many other of us who feel like this and want this, and so yeah, that's the dominant reaction I've had to the book.
Very good.
Yeah.
And I think it's natural to feel that way, perhaps, because the book has really made a profound impact to many people, mine included, right, to my life. And so, you've seen in the early part where we saw a lot of people quit their jobs, a lot of people started organizations, being part of initiatives and all of that, setting up new companies. Did you ever envision this level of impact to happen?
No, but the strange thing was that I didn't envision very much at all. I mean, at some point I just felt like I had to write this book, and it was mostly driven out of my own inner quest of. So I was familiar with Ken Wilber's work and these stages, and so I had some language to say why I was personally feeling like this, like this orange industrial way isn't working for me, and I was just so curious, like, does something like a teal organization exist, because that would be so cool, right? So I had this question, and I mostly wrote it for myself, and I remember I never very much thought about it, like, it's going to be interested. How am I, I'm not a marketer, like how's it even? And I decided to self-publish it, which everybody told me was stupid because nobody was ever going to read it. But there was just this intuition of like, my work is simply to do the research and write this thing, and then we'll see what happens from there. So no, I definitely never ever thought it would have this impact. The other side of that, though, is that I was so fascinated with what I found in the research, like finding the Buurtzorgs of this world, that I knew that I was onto something powerful, right? So I was just excited by it. So I knew it was powerful. The question was just like, was anybody gonna read it? And I was just so lucky that the word of mouth thing happened.
Yeah, very cool. And I mean, maybe subconsciously you did wish for it. Can I put it that way?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I'm a lazy person, so spending 3 years researching and writing a book, I definitely hope that people would read it. I mean,
very good. I mean, looking back, right, 10 years, a decade of impact. If you would change or add or reframe something or anything, small or big, from the book, would you think of a few things?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious what other people think in the chat, or I'm surprised by how well the book has held up. Like I've had so many conversations with people, and I haven't come across something where I go like, oh, like, there's a fourth thing next to these three things, or so in some ways I'm surprised, like, there isn't very much I would change at all. What I realized though is that some people read the book and come away with misunderstandings. So if I were to rewrite it, I would do some things differently, like the typical misunderstandings around self-management that you know of, right? People thinking that means everybody's equal, that nobody should have more power than anyone else, that people in former leadership positions should make no decisions at all, and so there's some of these misunderstandings that I would like to get out of the way, or especially around evolutionary purpose. I think it's a part that many people, so I often hear people like, oh yeah, and we have a purpose, so that's tick, as if like just having a mission statement, whereas I was alluding to something way deeper, which is that the organization has its own sense of purpose, its own energy, and that you're simply sensing and responding to where the organization wants to go, which is a pretty radical thought, and it sounds like not everybody got that. So maybe I could have been even sharper or clearer on those things.
Very good to hear this reframing, and I know a lot of people have been asking and are hopeful for a sequel. Have you contemplated on that?
Well, I feel like I've written a sequel, which is the video series. I just decided to make it a video series rather than a book because I thought that it might be more digestible, and for me it was fun to do. And the video series, I mean, it's more content than the book, right? Like, I mean, I think the audio book, is like 14 hours, and the video series is like 20 hours. And so for those of you who don't know, Reinventing Organizations, at least in my mind, was answering the question, is it possible to structure and run organizations from a different level of consciousness, right? Is it possible to run and structure organizations from a teal perspective? And after the book came out, I had conversations with quite a lot of leaders who were transforming their organization, the traditional organization, to trying to adopt some of these practices. And so the video series answers a different question, which is, okay, I get that it's possible, but we are a traditional organization, and how do we make the switch? And I was just privileged through these conversations to hear from lots of leaders who told me their stories about like, we made these mistakes, we got into these pitfalls, or this worked for us. And I heard the questions that came back over and over, and so I saw some patterns, and so I basically responded to like the typical questions that people ask themselves. And so I feel like there's very much a sequel out there. It's just a video series rather than a book.
Well, I would love to see a sequel in whatever new form that is. So I'm one of those hopeful people. But really, I'm very grateful for the book and also for the video. So for those who haven't watched the video, also do check those out. Probably we will share them on the chat so that you can find a link to it. Fred, given the depth of the impact the book has already, I mean, we have around over 200 people on Zoom. We have a lot more on live stream. And I'm pretty sure like there's hundreds of leaders now speaking about potentially shifting the way they lead. What legacy do you hope to leave in the world of business, the present and future generation of leaders, or even society at large?
Wow. It's not a question I ask myself very much. Like I feel, it's really not up to me. It's really up to this community to bring this where it wants to go. I mean, I see the long arc that Jos was talking about of, I feel we're just in the beginning stages of this. I very much believe that we are in sort of this historic, evolution where, for most people today, these factory ways of organizing, the pyramidal ways of organizing feel natural because that's what we're learning in school. And yet we know that there's these way more powerful, way more soulful ways of doing it. But we're still a small minority, right? And so there's just ways to go. But when I see the suffering that is out there in so many workplaces, or in schools, some of you might know that I just moved back from the US to Europe after living 8 years in the US, and we looked at alternative middle and high schools for our children in the French-speaking world, in France and French-speaking Belgium and in Switzerland. And we found a total of, I think something like 300 or 400 kids who live in, who go to really alternative middle and high schools in the whole French-speaking, European countries, out of millions of kids who still go, through traditional methods that they then, hopefully will unlearn one day. And it just broke my heart. It just broke my heart to see how little was available to school children, right? That we still get children to go through, 45 minutes at a time, drip feeding with no say whatsoever for 8 hours a day for 12 years of their lives, right? Where they have absolutely no say, very little in terms of wholeness, certainly nothing in terms of evolutionary purpose. And so, I'm very hopeful, and there is just, still tons to do. And so that's where I'm just so excited when I hear stories like, Tonny's story, of hearing like, wow, look out there, in Uganda and neighboring countries, like, stuff is happening. So I don't know, it's not my legacy, but I feel like we're all agents in this sort of monumental leap that is happening.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for the ignition and activation of that, Fred. I have a couple of questions which I would save for the last. I'd love to hear some questions from the audience. We have a Menti that's been popping up, and Lisa will bring some of those questions forward.
Yeah, so I'm going to do a bit of curating, if you'll permit me, based on the flow. So let me show, let's see if they show up here. Or maybe it's not necessary to do this, actually, because I need to be able to skip through them. Yeah, let me scrap that. I'm just going to read them out to you, Frederic. So there's one question here, which I think is kind of a juicy one, and it may have been something you addressed in one of your insights for the journey video, but there's a question with like 6 votes, which is about, with 10 more years of experience, would you make any changes to your characteristics and differentiators between teal and green organizations? Because I think there is like a green trap, right, that a lot of people get stuck in when they start exploring teal. And I find that there are often misconceptions between green and teal. So yeah, if you've addressed it in the video, maybe you could share some pearls of wisdom here for the group.
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious one for me is this question of hierarchy, right? And so a lot of people read self-management as, oh, finally the absence of hierarchy, right? And so you can misread that with sort of, in a green way. So, for those people who are familiar with these stages, right? So after sort of the orange industrial machine stage, there comes this green stage that loves to deconstruct hierarchies, right? Loves to deconstruct, sees everything as, oppressor hierarchies. And it's a beautiful instinct, but then we quickly land in sort of flatland where we go like, okay, everybody should be absolutely equal, right? And that means probably consensus, because otherwise, how do we make decisions? And so a lot of organizations go in that way, and the pendulum swings, to the extreme of that direction. And the big insight, that Ken Wilber and others have made is that you have dominator hierarchies, and we very much want to get rid of those. And we have natural hierarchies, or growth hierarchies, or actualization hierarchies, however you want to call them, which naturally show up. If we're a group of people, you, Lisa, Ria, me, on any topic, one of us will have more expertise or more passion or more experience or more insights or more connections or more resources, whatever it is. By any means, shine, right? And play that out to the fullest. right? And I will follow. And so, the metaphor I sometimes use is if you take any complex ecosystem, say a forest, right? Some trees will be, by definition, much higher than a fern or a mushroom, or, if you look at height, as, and that's okay. We want a tree to be the most beautiful tree, the fern to be the most beautiful fern, and the mushroom to be the most beautiful mushroom. The question is not like, how can we make the tree smaller so that we're all equal, right? So that's a fundamental misunderstanding, and that often happens when people go like, oh, self-management, that means everybody's equal, and bring in sort of the green perspective.
Yeah, thank you. I remember you, I forget how exactly you put it, but rather than wanting to make everyone equal, striving for making everyone fully powerful to whatever degree, to their highest level of engagement, right? And maybe connected to that, there's a question here about what about new work needs inner work? What inner competencies do we need to develop to really live teal organizations?
Yeah, it's something that I didn't address in the book at all. So for those people who are familiar with kind of Wilber's 4 quadrant, like I mostly looked sort of at the collective quadrant, so the systems and a little bit of the culture, assuming that people who would read this book would already inhabit this perspective and have done some of that inner work, right? But yeah, obviously, like any of you who work in these organizations, you, Lisa, and Kelly, and I mean, you've experienced that we need to create these spaces, for people to reflect, be it only just on the assumptions. One of the most powerful interventions that I've seen or heard of is simply for people to be in a group, where they can share vulnerably, and they look at whatever assumptions they hold about organizations and people, right? And that's when often like these pyramidal assumptions surface, right? And then now we can talk about it, and then we can talk about more beautiful assumptions. So yeah, I very much believe that inner work and outer work are very related. And the thing that I find exciting is when you don't separate them. So I think too often we separate them. We're like, let's do some inner work, right? And then now let's do business, right? Let's do strategy. And like a lot of people who, it's like when you actually start moving the system, right, that inner stuff shows up, like fears show up, and resentment shows up, or and then, oh, okay, wonderful, now let's work with that. And so do the transformation where at this exact same time you transform the outer and the inner. And I don't think that one necessarily comes before the other. Like when people say like, oh, we need to do 6 months of inner work before we even change, I go like, yeah, but then you do it in a vacuum. Right? It's actually so fun. Like, let's start moving the system, because that brings up stuff, and now now we can work with that stuff, and then that unlocks further things you can do in the system, and then the thing moves along.
Yeah, it reminds me also of what Mickey Kashtan says, and Mickey Kashtan was someone that you recommended to me, Frederic, early in the podcast journey, and she talks about these 3 shifts that are needed, and I know Ken Wilber talks about 4, but that the shift of the 5 core systems, which I know you talk about in one of your insights for the journey videos, decision making, information, etc. And then the other 2 shifts are inner shifts, right? An inner shift in the people who have power, and an inner shift in the people who don't or historically haven't. And those shifts are very vulnerable, right? I remember you talking about needing almost like managers anonymous kind of support groups where they can share with each other. Oh, this is hard. Like Kelly said, oh, I don't get to make decisions anymore.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let me choose another question from Minty here. We have one about large organizations. What would you say is needed? Well, this question says, what is needed to convince all the large organizations in the world to become more teal-like?
The person who's asked that question is probably going to be frustrated with me with my answer, because I'm going to extract the word convince from that question, which is that I really don't believe in convincing. Every time I've tried, it miserably failed. And so I often get this question like, how can I convince my boss? And I fully get it. You're frustrated, you see the possibility, and you go like, but the boss stands in the way, right? So I fully get where this comes from. And it doesn't work to convince, or at least in my perspective, if somebody has has managed to do it. And the worst thing I think you could try is like, give me the orange arguments. Like people sometimes ask me, like, can you, show me that the ROI, the return on investment, or, what we're asking of leaders is simply so different that even if you show them that this is superior, they won't embrace it because it's just not compatible with their worldview. So what I found though is just having deep conversation, really vulnerable conversations with leaders if they're willing to go there with you. Because the truth is that CEOs of large companies tend to be really miserable. And it's very vulnerable because to the outside, they seem like they're very successful and they want to keep projecting that image of success, obviously. But so if you can create a space where they can, talk about how hard this is and how lonely this is and how hierarchy just brings poison to any relationship, because you never know if people really mean what they mean, if they're just trying to flatter you. And like, if you can just vulnerably, open up about these things, then there might be a space for something to happen, to say, I know of leaders, across the block, and you can spend 4 hours with them and you have no interruption. How cool would that be, right? And so the only way I've found is not to convince, but is to listen to the pain of the leaders. And so often, if they're willing, like they feel heard, and it's often the first time that anybody's actually interested in them and in their pain. And when they go there, then something opens up for them sometimes to go like, okay, I'm willing to explore something else.
Thank you. I remember you saying that's so much more powerful because nobody wants to become a concept, right? That's not very appealing for us humans. Maybe, Rhea, shall I ask one more Menti question and then hand it back to you?
Sure.
So I'm going to kind of merge, see if I can do this. So there's a question here about since you wrote the book in 2014, do you think the needle has moved in the right direction in terms of organizations? Yes or no, or to what extent? And I guess if I weave in something here from, I know when we were talking about this event, we acknowledged that it's, there's so many amazing things happening, and at the same time, it's still a very small percentage of companies. And it's interesting that in North America, it seems harder to shift things, or it seems more persistent there, these kind of traditional hierarchies. And when you see news stories about, return to work, return to office mandates and stuff, I think many people can feel like this, it's the best of times and it's the worst of times. So how do you look at this moment that we're in now and sort of 10 years on? Is it where you hoped it would be? What gives you hope and what causes you pain looking at the world right now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously lots of things give me pain looking at the world right now, right? Like going from the climate to the water wars, and including the wars like Sudan that we barely talk about. And but the way I summarize it for myself is that I feel that compared to 10 years ago, the conversation has really shifted. And my book was part of it, but obviously there were other things. But my sense 10 years ago, when I was, researching this, I had the question, like, is something else even possible? Right? And so I feel like at the time, the talk was a lot about, like, for those people who are in this, the pain of our current model is just frustrating and slow and bureaucratic and etc. I feel like anybody who feels like that now, within a few months, if you really feel like the current model is broken, somebody will put a book in your hand, mine or somebody else's, and tell you, what, something else exists, right? And so I think the conversation has really moved from what's broken to what's possible. And I think that is a huge leap, right? And there's like all of these ecosystems and networks and stuff out there that makes that people can just experiment in ways. I mean, I remember how hard it was for me to find these 12 organizations that I profiled, right? And how like the different people I talked to didn't know of each other. right? Like they thought they were pretty much the only ones, right? That's how far back we were 10 years ago. And now we have all of sort of like these, ecosystems. So in that way, I think we've really moved forward. Like the conversation has really moved, and the possibilities are known and out there. And yeah, as you say, the percentage of organizations that have shifted is still very small. And I believe what somebody once told me, which is, things change generationally, right? Sometimes some older leaders, suddenly see the light. They go through an inner shift and a transformation. But I think what will be interesting is, once the thousands of, of nurses of Buurtzorg, grow older and their partners and their children, they will just have a whole different perspective. The hundreds of people in the current organizations who make the shifts, who experience this, who might go out there and become leaders or create other organizations. So, I think we're talking generational shift here.
Such a nice reflection, Fred. And just give all of us a moment to kind of think about those shifts.
Not to take away the frustrations I sometimes feel of like, why isn't this going faster? When I just see, the amount of suffering, or when I see organizations who have been doing amazing things and then fall back because, a more traditional leader comes back in, right? Like that breaks my heart every time. So I do feel the frustration often of like, why isn't this going faster? Just like I feel it for climate and so many other topics. And then I push myself to remember like, wow, we're so much further along than 10 years ago, and this is a generational thing.
Speaking of climate, Fred, would you maybe take a moment to share a bit of what you have been busy with over the last 10 years as this book was finding its way into the hands of people? And we're busy with a new project as well.
Yeah, I mean, Lisa showed them early on, like, the sort of 3 projects I did after the book came out. One was the illustrated version of the book. It's funny, in some languages, it now outsells the big one, by a factor of 2 or 3. And that was a really fun project with my friend Etienne, the illustrator. Then there was like the video series. And then lately it was this project that I've done with my wife and our growing team called The Week. And it was a project that was really born out of my own deeper climate awakening that happened a few years ago, where obviously I knew that, shit is hitting the fan, but I sort of knew it here. And a few years ago, I really started, feeling it at a deeper level. And that's when we decided, okay, we're going to focus on this for a few years. And we created this project called The Week. You can check it out on theweek.oo, theweek.oo. And it's a group experience to collectively make sense and help those of us who are in the space that I was in a few years ago of like, this feels like stuff I don't really want to engage in because it just feels so overwhelming and depressing. But on the other hand, I feel like I should be engaging with this, right? And so I feel torn. I have this cognitive dissonance. For all those people who feel in this space, we've created a space that we've very carefully prepared for people to go through an experience and face the facts, process the emotions that come up, and collectively, decide what to do about it. And so it's something that people can do in groups with their friends or with their family or with their colleagues. And we now have, like, I think 80,000 people in the world who've registered to participate, and half of them are in workplaces. So, and we start to see some really beautiful shifts happening in some organizations where everybody goes through the week at the same time, because just everybody goes through sort of a climate awakening. And then obviously the question is, okay, so what do we do now? By the way, if some people in the group have participated in the week, feel free to put something in the chat what it was like for you. Generally the response we get is just it's just very, very beautiful.
Absolutely. And I've had the pleasure of hosting the week 3 times, and once was with you, Fred. And actually, from that session, we had a few initiatives that came out of the group, and they're still going on with those initiatives. So really, really happy how that impacts us.
With gratitude to Life Sciences, who was like a philanthropic donator early on to help us make the films. And by the way, the Week is a nonprofit that is looking for funding because we have this cool thing and we can just, we want to scale it. So
Mhm.
if you're in the mood to make a donation, or have contacts with climate donors or climate foundations, please reach out because we could use it. We have this, we feel like, really amazing vehicle, and now we just need to scale it and bring it to the masses.
It's amazing how you've tackled all these projects in the span of the 10 years, that Reinventing Organizations has found its way to catalyze change in people, but also in organizations at large. And so, Fred, question to you. I'm really curious about this. What's next for Frederic? I mean, after all these 3 projects, what's next?
I'm in one of those fertile spaces of I don't know. So we just as a family moved from the US to France. So part of it is simply settling in and helping my children find their way in this new life here. And part of me is still, very much involved in the week and helping spread that, and occasionally with reinventing organizations. But I feel that, as of next year, some space is going to open up for potentially new projects. I always have like 5 or 6 ideas I'm excited about, and so I don't know. It's sort of in the spirit of evolutionary purpose. I feel like ideas choose people as much as people choose ideas, and so I'm curious, what's going to come. And so I honestly don't know.
Well, it's very good to know that you have 5 or 6 big ideas, and we're all very curious and waiting to witness how those come together and make another wave of impact to all of us. So, Fred, we're right at the part where we need to change the segment, and we do want to give back, and also from your wishes, right? We do want to give the voice back to the people. For dreaming, for reflecting, and all of that. And but before we go there, I just want to give you a space to share your last thoughts to the group, or maybe anything about the birthday party.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so yeah, grateful and excited. Grateful to those of you who've just organized this. Ria and Lisa and Elena and Catalina. I'm just also just incredibly grateful. I said it at the beginning, for everybody who's talked about the book and spread it and given it away, to everybody who's participated in the translation. I mean, it's just been an incredible journey. And I think that the thought that shows up for me also related to climate is I just believe that we're just way more powerful than we think. If we tap into what we deeply care about. And I was lucky that I cared about these things, and they happened to, but that's available to all of us. And so yeah, that would just be my invitation, is like, what is it that you really, really deeply care about? And if you care so deeply about it, go out there and take risks and make an adventure. What I've learned for sure is, when I deeply care about something and I share it with other people, like, it never feels as vulnerable as I think it is, right? People just resonate. Like, people resonate with you if you speak from a deep place. And so it always feels vulnerable, and then at first, and then it ends up being much less vulnerable than I thought it was. And so, I don't know why that shows up for me right now, but is the invitation for all of us to connect to what we really, really care about, and just go out there in the world with it.
Thank you so much, Fred. Really appreciate it. And so we move on to the next segment, which is really listening. And also, Fred, you just triggered the right segue into this, because we have one question that we want everyone to reflect in the smaller groups. And it's this question: if you dared to dream big or live your purpose more fully, what would it look like? So we'll pop it in in the chat so that you can reflect on the question as you find your way to your breakout rooms. We'll spend 10-15 minutes there, maybe 12 minutes somewhere in the middle, and we'll come back afterwards. So go ahead and join your breakout rooms. Hello.
I'm just thinking, Rhea, should we ask people if they feel comfortable to share a sentence in the chat?
Absolutely. I think that would be great.
So I saw there were some people sharing on the YouTube live stream. So feel free if you want, share your dream in the chat. It may come true. Put it into the universe.
Yeah, let's all manifest all those big dreams and support each other. Very cool. Oh. A lot.
Ray, I'm wondering, is now a good time to reveal our mirror board?
Absolutely. Maybe we can invite Fred if you're around to join us in the spotlight. That would be great. So this is part of the surprise that you don't know. So we have a Miro board, and maybe Lisa, you wanna share your screen?
Yeah. So here we go. So those of you in the chat who were asking, how can you share and connect with each other? We have a section of the board here where you can add, there's some instructions on the left where you can add an icon to where you are in the world and then add a link to your LinkedIn profile or whatever you want to share. We have other spaces where you can share some of your output from the reflections we did earlier. So we've got 2 canvases up here. You can share your dreams here on the Dream Big canvas. And we also have a general notice board if you want to share anything that you think would be good for the community to know. And then I mentioned before, we have here some of the many books that have been written inspired by Reinventing Organizations. And we asked the authors to share some words. And so there's some lovely little speech bubbles in there that you can dive into after the event if you want to have a look. You can also add any other books there or reading that you think is good for us to know about. So there's an Enlivening Edge link there. And then for some of the after parties, if there are any not listed here, feel free to add yours. So we know that there's one in London straight after this. We know there's one in Basel in Switzerland on the 24th. There's going to be an online event. So those of you who are US, like North America based, the Teal team are putting together this Teal landscape report. So there are people you can connect with in North America, but that's going to be very cool. They've mapped the stages of the movements. So lots of fun things. Look at you all flying around. So lots of goodies here for you to interact with. And we're going to keep the board open for a month, I think we said, right?
Yeah. And Fred, just also for you to know, especially in the map section, the current ones, the ones that Lisa has shown you, those are actually testimonies of how the book has impacted them. They're all around LinkedIn, different places. And we have basically captured all of those testimonies into a map. And so it would be a fun thing to read through after this. And so for those who want to engage in this Miro board, I will share the link with you. Yeah, you can also add your stuff to it.
Oh, amazing. I can't wait to read it.
Mhm. Very good.
Okay, well, that's the end of the organized fun, I think. So if there's anything that that Frederic, you want to say, or the organizing team want to say, after that, we also wanted to give an opportunity for people to come off mute and say something, or you can do the little celebrate reaction. We can get a party going here.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate my gratitude, in this case particularly to the organizing team. Thank you so much, Lisa and Andrea and Elena and Katarina.
Yes, here they
For
are.
throwing this. I thought it was so beautiful the way you helped the community come to life. I love the bubbles in the beginning of who changed jobs and who wrote a book and who just seeing how participatory this is, and I reading on the mirror is going to be amazing. I think it's going to keep me feel connected with this space. So yeah, just lots and lots and lots of gratitude, and just saying once more, like I feel super celebrated, and I think the book feels celebrated, but I hope the community feels celebrated, and obviously we're just this is one community of so many overlapping communities of this ecosystem that is and everybody here is probably part of 2 or 3 different things, and there's your podcasts and Teal Around the World, and I think it's important for the movement to see itself, and for us to realize, like, sometimes it feels frustrating because change is slow, but on the other hand, we see everything that's happening, and it gives us heart and courage. So thank you for throwing this party. I can hang out for I think another 20-30 minutes before my family grabs me. So if some people want to hang out and just open mic, and I'd love to keep hanging out. Is it okay to keep the room open for?
Sure,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've also, you now have the right to unmute yourselves, so
Woo.
we can make it a party.
We're very
So much for
grateful to have
self-management.
such
We're
a
all
big group.
muted.
Frederic, it's Boca here. When you're long dead, what do you hope your children will do professionally?
And their children.
Some of you might have heard me say this. There's this author, Parker Palmer, who's been very influential to me, sort of a father figure, mentor to me just through his books. And he talks about this. The sentence that I will never forget. Where he said, like, for the longest time, he led the life that he thought he should live, until he understood that it was way simpler, that he could simply listen to the life that wants to be lived through him. And that just blew my mind, the life that wants to be lived through me. And so I really have no hopes. Like my hope is that they are in a position to listen to the life that wants to be lived through them, right? And whatever that is, part of me, if they want to become an investment banker, will go like, is that really the life that wants to be lived through you? But who knows?
My mother, I think, used to tell myself and my brother, the path is the goal. And that always resonated with me. It's like, just enjoy the journey and grow in it and through it and with others that are on it.
Is there example of hello, Clément here. So is there any example of government that since the book has started have adopted those practices?
The United States government, obviously. No, I'm kidding. It's a good question for the community as a whole, because you might know things that I don't know. I heard over the years of sort of like municipal governments where some cool things were happening. I imagine that as always, these things tend to be fragile because, you know, a new election happens and a new majority comes in. So for instance, in France, where you might be from, Clément, you know, there was like a place called Saillon, a small community that had like a really interesting thing where the short story was small village. The previous mayor wanted to, you know, allow a supermarket just outside that would have killed sort of the inner, you know, the small shop, the few shops that were in there. And at the last minute, a group of citizens came together and said, you know, we're going to, you know, get up for the vote, you know, to become municipal leadership. And they said, we have no program. The program is going to be what we co-construct. And they just like made all of these workshops to get, you know, the whole of the, you know, the village to construct the policies over the next 4 years. And they did some pretty amazing things. So that's an example in Saillon.
Okay.
Yeah, there's examples of that, but like, yeah. I mean, some people looked into this when you have sort of these evolutionary steps, and I won't get this exactly right, I don't remember it exactly, but there's sort of a natural sequence when you look at also historically, like often it's artists who capture this first, right? And then it's entrepreneurs, right? And you know, because these are smaller systems that can change, right? And the last systems to change tend to be like the political system, and then even you know, later like the broader economic system. You know. So most likely we're, you know, in this phase.
Okay, let's look for it. Thank you.
Yeah. And if somebody knows, has examples for, you know, government agencies or local governments, or even, you know, who knows, larger levels, you know, put it in the chat. I'd be interested. I think if we go by it would be James next.
Just a question, Frederic. Talk about the connection between this Reinventing Organizations and your project, The Week.
On some level, the connection was simply like, at some point I got fascinated by this and wanted to do it. So at first there was no obvious connection, but obviously there are very deep connections. So for example, in The Week, the whole principle is that a group of people go through an experience together that triggers deep emotions and help each other, you know, deal with this and show up with a level of wholeness that is unusual. And we see that, you know, working in the workplace, where we get so many messages of people saying like, hey, this is a deeper conversation that we've ever had. Or lots of people tell us, like, even like at home, like I did it with a group of friends and we've been friends for 20 years and we've never had conversations this deep. So that's just, you know, one examples of how these things come together. Jan or Nora?
Hey, hi, Fred. It's great to see you. It's been 10 years since we been invited to your home in Brussels with my wife Bea, and we sat with Elaine and yourself, and you know, ever since, you know, been this ripple effect. So, you know, I tried to bring your book to Czech Republic, but I didn't succeed. But I passed it on to someone else who did, and it kind of started a life of its own. And it's been an amazing journey. And I would say that your work and kind of your personal investment impacted me in a very profound fashion. So thank you for that. And I can see it's still acting, like the ripple effects still continue on every side. So that's my personal gratitude to you as a reverse for the gratitude you have given. And it's been an amazing journey and a very windy journey, because you cannot force people to evolve. You cannot force organizations to evolve. So I've struggled, and it was like one step in front or two steps in front and one step back. And but you know, this is important to realize that we can only see the results looking backwards. It's very difficult to kind of estimate what can happen in the future. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Nora and Marina, because I noticed that we've had,
All right.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, they're here.
This is Berlin.
Whoa! Hello, Berlin.
Yes. So thank you so much. It's been such a wonderful event. We have enjoyed it so much.
It's perfect. We are in Bayer, and as you know, Bayer is on its journey right now. And this was a super stimulative and motivating event for us today. Thank you.
Thank you from all of us.
Very nice.
That reminds me, one day I was invited to speak in Berlin at a festival, and I went there, and it was a full room. It was festival. There was like a nice atmosphere, and people, I walked on stage, and people just started clapping, and I hadn't done anything, right? And I just, remember turning to the group and saying, like, you will help me realize, like, make possible my dream of my 50, when I was 15 years old. And, I would imagine, like, being in front of a crowd that goes wild because I'm a rock star. And of course, I never turned into a rock star. I just wrote a book, And so I just turned to the room, and I just went like, hello, Berlin! And the whole room went like, yay! And it was like, that was sort of like the best day of my life. So that's how I feel with you guys in Berlin right now. Hello, Berlin! Marina, I want to go to you.
Yes, hi Fred. First, thank you. Grazie. Grazie. My question, what did you learn about organization after you wrote Reinventing Organization? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, really what I learned is what I poured into these 130 videos, which was really, all of the, like, just a meandrous, wonderful, difficult ways of transforming organizations, right? This is something that I didn't know when I wrote the book. When I wrote the book was really like describing organizations that were already there, right? And many of them, like Buurtzorg, had been created that way. Not all of them, but many had been created that way. There was a small chapter in that book about, like, how to transform existing organizations, which was just based on a handful, Favi and, a few others. And that's where I really feel that we've collectively as a field learned so much, right? And in the videos I poured what I've learned about how do you make these transformations, but so many people in this room have also learned tons, right? And so that's really where I feel like, the field is advancing. It's not so much about the end point, because I still feel it's really valid. I wouldn't have very much to add about the end point. So it's really all about, okay, if we want to shift, how do we get there? Like, how do we avoid the typical pitfalls, the typical misunderstandings? So what I've learned is really a lot about that, transformation journey.
Hello, Frederic. I'm really grateful for being here, and I'm really thankful for your work. My question is that do you follow what kind of approaches, methods are really emerging now, like Theory U or what corporate rebels are doing, or our Reinventing Organization map and all these? So could you maybe name a few others which you are aware of that is existing and helping this steel field in a way?
Quite frankly, like lately, I've been so focused on climate that I fear that I will, name the wrong people. So I prefer not to go there. Other than name those who are, here in the room. Like, obviously, Teal Around the World has been sort of a hub that is dormant right now. Enlivening Edge, the platform is still going strong in terms of newsletter. Lisa's podcast, is a place where I keep learning by listening to other organizations. yeah, there's sort of this dream that we would create sort of like the ultimate map, right? And lots of attempts have been made, and I think it will always, work in some ways and be elusive in others. I would rather than ask me, I would harvest the collective knowledge here, and if you know of a really important resource that's been important for you, put it in a chat, and then we'll sort of crowdsource the things that are happening. And obviously, we're looking only at organizations here, but sort of this big historic movement going from sort of an orange mechanistic worldview to a green worldview, to a teal worldview. It's happening in all sorts of fields, and I'm no expert at all, but like in medicine, this is happening. Like suddenly we start seeing the body not just as this machine, but at this ecosystem, where we have trillions of bacteria in our gut that interact with us, where we, medicine is going through a similar shift, and it's just starting. Agriculture is going through a similar shift, right? Where instead of looking at industrial agriculture that is very mechanistic, we look at regenerative agriculture that is ecosystemic, right? And every field, goes through something like this, because, this is just like this bigger shift that is happening. So, if you're aware of some of these other things, feel also free to put them in the chat. Interestingly, in some ways, I think organizations are a little bit ahead of the curve. Like as I was saying, like I'm really dispirited to see how slow education is. School still is, seems to be lagging behind, but one day that will break open too. So I don't want to be the one saying, you speak next. So just feel free. And I would encourage the women in this group to also feel like they can speak up and interrupt, and it can be a question, it can be a comment, it can be whatever shows up.
Frederic, what at the end of the book, the teal organizations in a teal society, and you kind of touch on some things in there that you could see possibly with teal and other organizations, like the porous organizations, and them possibly working together and getting less kind of defined lines around organizations. Have you had any more stuff on that? Coming to you from Canada, by the way.
Yeah, well, welcome from Canada. I definitely see other people sort of echo that thing. I see it, for instance, in lots of sort of activist movements, where you see people, being part of a number of different movements. Like I found it very beautiful with the week, the climate movement, just to see other climate movements and people just absolutely not seeing each other as competition. Even though, like, for instance, funding is limited, right? And, we're looking for the same money, but like, there's no sense of competition, because obviously the purpose transcends us of getting quick climate action. And for me, that was so refreshing to be in a space with other activists. And sometimes we have different theories of change. And that's where you see like the power of the ecosystem, like you attack it from here and we attack it from there. And so that's sort of an example that I've seen. And again, other people might have other examples and put it in the chat.
Thank you. I'll look that up.
I have a question to the point about assumptions that you mentioned. I've been thinking about the assumption letting go of fear, and what I understand is that letting go of fear, of course, it can help us take action. I also understand that fear is like a natural human emotion, a strong one that protects us. So I'm curious to know about your methods to, on the one hand, accept that we feel this emotion at times, and on the other hand, that we don't let it dominate our decision making. What tools and methods do you use to handle that dilemma, that paradox?
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to give you a quick thing that shows up for me, and there is actually a longer video, or even two, on this in Insights for the Journey, so the video series. One of the misunderstandings I sometimes hear, and this was not necessarily what you said, but that I often hear, is this thing of like, oh, in order to go towards, these sort of TL ways of working, trust is central, and I should just trust, I should let go, and oh, fear is bad. Like, why do I fear? Why do leaders fear of letting go? And my sense is, as you say, like, fear has a function. It protects us, and it comes often with this other thing of like, control is bad, right? Because we've been so hurt by the way control is done in traditional organizations, right? With all the hierarchy and the bureaucracy and all these processes that kill any life, that we go like, oh, control is bad, we should give up control. And the truth is, living systems, if we want to use the metaphor of an organization's living systems need and want control, right? The typical metaphor is like, my body controls my body temperature, and it stays within a very narrow bound. And if it goes below or higher than that, lots of things kick in, right? Because we want to stay in that bound. It's just, how do we exert control? And so sometimes the misunderstanding is, I should just let go. I should just trust. But actually what you realize is, in these self-managing systems, there are methods for control, like for the system to be in control, not for one person to control other people, but for the system to be in control. And actually there's something often very wise in us that goes like, I fear of just letting go. I fear of just like, because yes, I've seen so many organizations make that mistake of just like, oh, anything goes, like, I remember, to give you one example, a large organization where they just said like, let's get rid of any sort of the procurement things around travel. We will just trust people, but it was, an organization, 80,000 people. We'll just trust people, like, to make good decisions around travel, and we won't check. And then they were surprised when a few months later, some people had really abused the system, right? They had flown first class with, their spouse, and had stayed in like, ridiculously expensive hotels, and then go like, see, we can't trust people, right? And obviously, in any system, lots of people, will do the right thing, and a few people will test, the limits. The question is, how does the system self-correct? And have we put the thing in place for the system to self-correct? And so what we go to is from a system that was, controlled through power, through hierarchy, to a system of control through self-correction, right? And so you're right to not want to give up control in the old way until you've put in place a system where the system self-corrects, right? And sometimes you can let go, and then something like this happens and the system will self-correct. You don't need to have it planned everything up front. But just to say that, don't fall, I think, for the misunderstanding, like control is bad, or like I shouldn't be in fear, I should just trust. Oh, why am I not trusting? There might be a very real reason that you go like, hey, maybe I shouldn't let go before something else is in place. Yeah, I hope that was helpful.
Hola, Frederic.
Hola.
Hola. How are you?
Hola, David.
I know.
Good to see you again.
Yeah. I was just wondering, I'm a little surprised in all these years that I've read not too much about education. You just mentioned a little bit before about education. And I have the feeling we keep education children, the old paradigm of control. So it becomes harder then when we are adults to try to transform ourselves. And I don't know why. I don't know if you have any thoughts or conversations about it.
Yeah, I have a theory around that, about why education, changing schools is so hard, and changing school systems. And this is just a theory. I have no evidence. I haven't tested. I think there's two reasons that I see. One is the fear that parents have for their children, right? Like, I want my children to succeed, and we live in a very competitive society, and so there's obvious fear of like, am I going to make an experiment of my child that's gonna hurt them, right? And so, our children are just what is most precious to us, and so to make an experiment on them feels scary, right? And so that's what you hear, a lot when you talk to alternative schools. Like they tell us, like, oh, parents are so scared. They want alternatives, but then they get scared of it. And typically what you have is like, oh, in the younger years, kindergarten and the first few years of school, you can do some Montessori, but then later on it gets serious, right? Like, we get towards potentially university and, like now we need to get serious, right? So fear is one factor. And that's well identified. There's another factor that I believe in strongly, and I haven't read anybody else talk about this, but I feel it's important. And I think it's a Stockholm syndrome of us parents, which is that so many of us have suffered in the school system, have deeply suffered, right? All those who were misfits for the school system, obviously, right? Or kids who were bullied, but even kids like me who, I was really good in school, so I sort of sailed through school. So you could say like school worked for me. On some level it did. On another level, it completely killed my creativity, right? It completely killed my sense of, like, I had no idea of who I was at the age of 18. I had no idea what I was interested in. I was just, so in that way, people would have looked at me and said like, hey, Fred, school worked for him. But in some ways I was deeply hurt by it in, ways that I can only now start to name. And when we're asking parents or teachers to imagine a radically different system, and when we show them systems that work, when we show them Montessori schools, when we show them Sudbury Valley schools that have track records of 20, 30 years that are amazing, where children just blossom, we can show it to them, right? And I think one of the main reasons they reject it is because it's too painful for them to go like, hey, if that is true, are you saying that I should not have suffered? You're just asking me to say that I needlessly suffered for 12 years in the school system. And for so many parents, I think that is almost, they go like, no, there must be something that was valuable in that for me, because otherwise you can't just say that I could have had this and that I suffered instead. And so my sense is that anybody who wants to work in this field needs to really create spaces for parents to grieve their own experience of school. And only once they've grieved that and gone through it, will they be in a space where they go like, okay, now I'm in a space where I'm willing to look at my own children and their future. And for teachers, it's even, it's grieving their own school system, and most of them think like, it worked for me. Like I loved it so much I became a teacher, but still grieving what, But then it's even harder. It's like grieving what I did to the children in those years where I was a traditional teacher, which is really hard to do, right? Like we were joking, Lisa, about like manager, anonymous, right? Like if I used to be a manager, right? Like, but like teacher anonymous, would be really hard. So I think the only way we can crack this is really by creating spaces, a little bit like I've created them for the week with climate, but to really create spaces where parents go through their own history of schooling and teachers go through their own history, and we grieve that, and then we can move on.
And maybe, Frederic, if I may, to add on that, I think if we look at schools as organizations, help schools to organize differently. Because whenever I speak to teachers, it's about the pain of sitting in the teacher's room. It's not so much interacting with the children. Yeah. It's much more on if you want to change something in the system as an individual, as a teacher, it's so hard for the individuals because of the way schools are structured. So I will be actually working with a group of leaders from schools tomorrow, and we'll talk to them about how decision-making can look differently, for example, because I think they are sometimes trapped between hierarchy and the green, right? So it's either it's consensus or it's very hierarchical. So I think to help them to get out of that can be very helpful.
It's a topic I'm so passionate about. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it. There's a book called Free to Learn from somebody called Peter Gray, which I highly recommend. It's a short book, And it traces a little bit like Reinventing Organizations, sort of a historical arc. And it talks about how, humans for the longest time were hunter-gatherers. And they were like living in little groups of 20 to 40 people with, children, mixed age groups. And they were learning by playing, right? And all mammals, we know this, are programmed to learn by playing, right? That's how our brain evolves, right? And they were playing at, hunting, playing at trapping, playing, and that's how they grew into this. And what he writes in the book is the huge shift when we went from the age of hunter-gatherers to the age of agriculture. Because suddenly children were needed in the fields, especially in the summer, to work in the fields 8-10 hours a day and do something for which their brain isn't programmed, which is to not play, but to work continuously for 8-10 hours a day. And the only way to do that, to get children to do that, is through physical violence, is to force kids to do that. And you look at all historic, all agrarian societies have these myths that suddenly appear where humanity is fallen, where children, are sinners and have to be educated, and if needed through coercion and violence, right, to do what we want them to do, right? That's what all sort of agrarian societies have as founding myth. And then he goes on in this book to share how when public school systems were created in the 19th century, and he has these chilling quotes from people in Prussia and Germany and in England and in Massachusetts, the founders of the public school systems that all have quotes that go along the line of like, yes, we teach children to read and write and calculate, but really the school is there to beat the will out of the child, right? To make the child obedient, because no child is programmed to sit for 6 hours, 8 hours a day, right? The only way we can do that, right? And I had read this book. This is a fun story to tell. It was shortly after the book came out, and one of the first invitations I received was in Belgium, in Antwerp, to talk in front of 300 school principals and teachers about reinventing organizations to change the school system, to change one school, like you were saying, Rosa, right? And I was imagining going there to talk about reinventing organizations, and at the last minute, after reading this book from Peter Gray and this story about like hunter-gatherers, agriculture, right? And I told them, like, you know what? The only way, like, I'm not going to do a talk about reinventing organizations. I will talk about more deeply, like, what we're doing to children. And do you agree? And they didn't know what they were in for. And I basically told them the story of Peter Gray, right? And so I walked them through this thing, through this change. And then I had all these quotes, from these founders of school systems talking about, how the school system is basically there to get the children to obey and to, beat the will out of the child. And the room was getting really silent with all these cool principles. And I ended my little talk by saying, if so many teachers and so many principals are burnt out in the school system, I don't think it's only because school is hard. I think that is part of your soul no longer wants to participate in this carceral system. And then something happened. It's the only time it's ever happened to me, that the whole room clapped, but not like the whole room started clapping like sort of this deeper recognition of all of these principles of like, hey, truth has been spoken here. And it wasn't me, it was Peter Gray, right? That I was of like, and that was just the most amazing, the most chilling thing, like this whole room clapping of like, what part of us no longer wants to participate in the system.
Thank you, Frederic.
Hello, Fred. Good evening. And first of all, hi, nice to see you again. Thank you very much for ruining my corporate life. The alternative route was so much more interesting.
It's so good to see you, Stefan. Stefan and I, go way back.
Question to you. I've been hearing a lot about education systems, about changes in administration and industry. One of the branches that I'm missing is finance, and I'm wondering, are you aware of any examples where the finance industry is shifting or maybe even partnering for projects to advance teal ideas?
I haven't looked into it, so I know very little. I don't feel I have something very intelligent to say. Again, if other people have, put it in the chat. I mean, there are some people, the people from Corporate Rebels, they're creating funds that invests in organizations that then adopt sort of these organizational principles. And I think that the real problem there is that underlying our finance system is a monetary system. And some, some people might have looked into this. Charles Eisenstein's book, Sacred Economics, is a great book. If somebody could type that into the chat, maybe Lisa, you could, Sacred Economics by Charles Eisenstein. So we have a monetary system where money is created through debt and through interest. And so we have monetary systems that can only survive through growth. Like if we don't grow because of interests, the whole system collapses like a deck of cards. And so with a monetary system that's based on debt and interest, we will always have extraordinarily powerful levers that will always push us for more. Right? It's just baked into the system. And so, that's sort of like the orange monetary system, right? And, what does a teal monetary system look like? People have looked into this. There's a Belgian guy called Bernard de Dietard who's looked into alternative monetary systems and who are not debt-bearing, but who might be nature-based or who might be demurring. And so there's these other, I haven't looked very deeply into this. Mm-hmm. But so my sense is for the system to really shift, we need to shift the underlying monetary system, which is, of course, huge. How do you even start doing that? That's, consciousness has to evolve, much longer, or our current system needs to collapse at some point for this to even be possible. And I think, unfortunately, that, environmental collapse might bring us there, we're not probably that far away, maybe a few decades from interest never being able to be paid back because we simply can't, achieve the growth or don't want to achieve the growth that is implied. And so my question that I'm interested in is is there a way within that existing monetary system for the finance system to still be reinvented? I don't know. And if again, put it in the chat. My sense is that it can only be reinvented with people who say okay, I'm willing to, make less interest, make less return, and not go for the maximum optimization. But then it's very much based on people just restraining themselves. But again, I hope that other people have thought more deeply about this.
If I can chime in on that real fast. Thanks for that. That was really interesting. It was in our breakout conversation. We actually talked about this a little bit, and a concept I've had for a while that is related to this about raising the consciousness on money. If we just rename, it's a very simple concept. If we just renamed money gratitude tokens, you provided a service or a product, and I gave you gratitude for having provided that for me, it can actually change how you think about capitalism and profits and performance and all sorts of things if you start thinking of it as exchanges of gratitude for somebody doing something for you. And that is not anywhere near what you're talking about, Frederic, which is a complete rethinking of money, but it is I think it could have a lot of consciousness changes if even one country renamed their money something along the lines of these are gratitude tokens, and people started thinking of the economy that way, that it could have cultural impacts. So just random thought experiment out there.
Love it.
The gift economy.
Mm-hmm.
Frederic, hi, I'll jump in here. I'd like to just thank you for putting out this wonderful work, and also to Lisa and Shay and the rest of the team that have been so great at facilitating today and making this all kind of come together. My question for you is, I actually was, I would say, successful in implementing a teal structure into a music company some years ago as a chief operating officer.
Yeah.
And the obstacle I ran into was growth pathways for staff and this notion around titling. The team loved the dynamic nature of it and how it interplayed and the agility it provided. But the question I got a lot was, well, how do I grow in this? And in a kind of labor market where your title is relative to labor market rates and how they want to progress their career beyond the organization, I found that very tricky. And I'm just curious if you or anyone else has kind of navigated that successfully.
Again, like if somebody wants to speak to that either in the chat or in person, feel free, because you might have more direct experience than I have. My sense from learning from others is that obviously there's huge growth simply by disaggregating the roles, right? That what you typically do, you disaggregate roles, and then you can exchange roles, and I'm interested in learning this thing, and then you start seeing like these amazing things where somebody who works in a factory role on the shop floor, but then also does this one thing on social media because they're good at it, and then they do like video editing because they're good at and suddenly like they grow into like these different. So like the actual growth tends to happen a lot inside the organization, and then the question is, oh yeah, but how do I map myself to the outside world? Yeah. And what some organizations do is that they allow people to have sort of titles for the outside world, like sometimes for your business card, like I'm a VP of something, or and I've seen different companies do different things. Like some companies simply say like, do whatever, just to the outside world, just tell whatever, and we trust that you do this. Or you could have systems where you have like a little committee inside, just like you sometimes do have that for salaries, like people that review, self-set salary raises, where people sort of say like, I think my title now should be this to the outside world. And then you can have a committee that reviews that, and it's sort of peer-based review. So my sense would be that if people feel that as necessary, then let by any means let's acknowledge that need. I would never go like the ideological route of saying like, no, titles should be abandoned, so you should not have titles. You should not even want that. Like, no, okay, that's a real need. How do we fill that need? But then rather than me as the founder or leader of this organization, me discerning those, because I don't want ever to be in that position, why don't we have like a little team that reviews these things? That's what shows up for me, but I'm curious if anybody else.
Frederic, can I pick up on that one, because it's been the question I've been wanting to ask, and now you've got right to it. A couple of hours before I joined this call, I was introduced by a third party as the CEO of my business, and I absolutely cringe. I'm not in any way a CEO, but it's the only way that outsiders can describe you. They're trying to pick out who you are. Have you come across the best word to describe the source who provides the context and the catalysis in the last 10 years? Has there been a word that's made you smile or thinking, ooh, that does encapsulate what I was writing?
I haven't, I'm struggling with this myself. I'm often talking about the person that's holding the space for others, but then talk about that in the outside world, like I'm the space holder. People go like, what? So I fully get why in the end CEO sticks. Yeah, just one thing that I would want to add to this, which is not an answer to your question. And again, other people put something in the chat if you found a great way to describe it, a great title. One thing that I've noticed in quite some organizations is that people disaggregate titles, right, or job descriptions into these granular roles, but they tend not to do it for the historic CEO, and that is to me sort of like a big missed opportunity. The CEO role can also be disaggregated into a number of things, right? One of them is being the outside face, I think, which is something that you just alluded to, right? Right? Another can be to be the source, but maybe it's not even, it's not the same person. One of them is to hold the space for these practices so that we don't fall back to, you know, old ways of doing things, right? And one of them might be to, you know, facilitate, you know, the most important conversations around, you know, strategy and these kind of things. And so I think it's really vital that also for the CEO role, we disaggregate these things. And then we ask ourselves, like, am I still the right person to do all of them? Or like, you know, these fit me well, and these would actually be much better done by other people. And then sometimes by doing that, you actually have names for these things. And some of them you might reuse for the outside world, right? Like, and then people say, like, you're the CEO, and you say, like, you know what, we don't quite operate in this traditional way. And so I'm not a traditional CEO, but I do have the role of, you know, being sort of like the outside face of the organization for the world. So that maybe that's what you meant when you said a CEO, right? So yeah, forward a couple.
Hi, Fred.
Hey.
Hi. So I actually can't see you. My screen keeps freezing. We had a series of conversations a few years ago after I published a feature story on Holacracy 1 for courts to elevate these ideas.
Yeah.
And it was so impactful, I ended up joining Holacracy 1 as a partner to advance that work. And now again, I'm focused on placing stories in the media. And I'm looking for those case studies that will break through into the mainstream market. I spent years covering Zappos. And I'm optimistic about the Bayer case study. So if folks from Bayer are on the call, send me a note. But I'm actively pitching a story to news publications right now. So it's kind of a call to anyone. If you have a story, send me a note. Love to hear it. And I'm taking note of what's coming through the chat. And I know, Lisa, you have so many great examples on your podcast. So I'll be, drawing from that as well. I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most important things is just to keep multiplying the stories, right? My sense is that when people hear for the first time about something like Buurtzorg, it's sort of easy to dismiss. You go like, that's sort of a fluke, that's sort of like an outlier. But once you hear like 2 or 3, 5, 10 of these stories, you might still not embrace it because it's not how you look at the world, but you start to accept it as another reality, right? And that's how I think at some point people will just go like, okay, yeah, there's this whole other way of doing things, and it's no longer fringe or so. I think, yeah, it's so important.
Thank you.
Paul, we also go way back.
Yes, Fred. I joined this call because I saw on LinkedIn this announcement, and I said, "Well, my old friend Freddie apparently wrote a book. He's done some things over the years." And I was describing in some of the breakouts I had that I felt like if you're going to a colleague's the child of a colleague, if you're going to like his soccer game whenever they're a teenager, and you see, oh, that person has some talent, they might really do something, and then 10 years later you see them at the World Cup and they're leading the team to an international victory. That's how I felt a bit. I knew you had it in you, and I was, you and I talked about organizations. We did some nice work with them, and you always had these inspiring ideas, and you inspired me as my manager. And then I come here on this call and I think, well, we'll chat for a bit and see what this book he did. And it's you're leading this worldwide movement here, and you've inspired literally hundreds of people, and they all have these amazing stories. And good Lord, man, like I said, it's it was like I knew you whenever we were hanging out at the high school together, and now you invite me, hey, I have a business thing going. And it's the World Cup, and you're the goalie. It's I'm very impressed, man. It's amazing, and a testament to you, and a testament to everyone you've inspired who's picked up these ideas and are doing great things with them.
Oh, that's so fun! Thank you so much, Paul. Yeah, indeed. Like we go way back.
I told the story in my breakout. I said, look, guys, you want to know how inspiring he was? He has all these ideas, these organizations. One of his clients was La Poste. Belgian postal workers. He would inspire those guys, and he would say, "This thing can work with Belgian postal workers who were famous for sitting at home on zero contracts, and they're basically the only thing they're known for is strikes and sitting on their ass." And he would inspire those guys, say, "This can work even here." And you guys don't know what this guy what he draw from, and how he would inspire people even in the most challenging of environments.
Thank you so much, Paul, for crashing the party and finding out what this was about. Cheers.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know how much longer we want to do this. Is there any last thought or question?
Frederic, I just wanted to, it's Romina here. Hey, everyone. I just wanted to say sorry for being late, first of all, held up today, but I managed to make the last 10 minutes plus this after party here. So what a blessing to be here. I read your book in 2019, just after studying values and becoming a Barrett values practitioner. And you gave me language and a framework on which I could hang both my prior work and develop my future work. And it's led me to become more in line with who I am and who I feel like I'm called to be, both professionally and personally. And since then, participating in Teal around the world from the very first conference with Rhea and Tim and everybody, 3 years of leaning into Teal networks, and then culminating in an experience of the week with Rhea after the last Teal around the world. I'm now on a path leading operations in a national Canadian environmental stewardship charity, and I'm implementing all kinds of financial and other Teal practices. And it all started with reading your book, really. So thank you for giving me the confidence, and thanks everyone for being part of my journey that I've met. It's been wonderful. What an inspiration you've been to me. Thank you.
Any very last one?
Fred, I think you should talk to us like you did in Berlin. I think
you should.
You should end the call the same way.
I should end the call in the same way.
Can I?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Hi, Frederic.
Hi.
I don't know if I'll be the last one, but there was this last moment where I realized we were about to close, where I was like, maybe I do want to share my voice here. So I was just reminiscing on like I first learned about your book actually in 2016 when I was barely 26, 27, and very, very young. And I don't know if you remember me, but you were in Boston. Otto Schammer was in Shanghai at the Party School of Shanghai. And I think you guys met for the first time. And in the call today, I suddenly realized that the past almost 10 years, your book, and I saw many people mention Theory U as well today in the chat window. Actually, it's your book and Otto's Theory U book that completely changed my 20s to my 30s. And now I'm like 35. And I kind of want to I don't know if it's a question that I want to present here or just a voice. I've been having exchanges with people in the chat window today. And I just wanted to say that the last 10 years, because I was bringing this work to China, I've also had colleagues on this call today from China, and we, Fiona is actually organizing.
Fiona was there. I saw that Fiona
yeah, exactly. Tis was there.
And
yeah, Tis was there, and I think the Chinese folks are going to have a party as well on the 25th. So I just wanted to present. So there's a lot of things that's worthy of celebration. I know I kind of want to play a bit of a devil's advocate right now. Just I was very cautiously sharing in the chat that the last 10 years there's a lot of impact, even from me, in a few years ago, incubating a women leadership program at a really big tech company in China and stuff like that. But I will be very in full Teal spirit. I will say that it also means that it came across a lot of organizational and systemic resistance that has led to a lot of personal trauma. Actually, I've been still very much involved in the Teal space. I helped organize the Teal around the world with Rhea and Tim the last 2 years before the sabbatical and stuff like that. But just sitting here right now, I'm here on vacation, I realized I've been running away from something in this Teal journey. It's the fact that I have also been deeply traumatized by this journey. And there are things that I realize I cannot handle just being myself, thinking that I'm disconnected from everyone, when really there's this huge global community. So I just realized maybe part of the celebration is also looking at the things that have been difficult about it, and like how can we create a space for people who have been on this journey. And like I would so wish to transcend the challenge that's being presented for me on this teal journey and step back into like a much larger level of impact. But I keep getting stuck on the things that happened a few years ago on this journey. And so I just wanted to presence that voice. And yeah.
I'm so glad you did, and that there's space for that, because these journeys, I mean, let me put it this way. I often feel the same thing that you're feeling with my climate journey of the last few years, right? And I don't know if it's part of what the pain that you're feeling, but sometimes for me, like knowing what is possible, or it's the same with education, knowing what is possible, and then feeling like this is like, like there's only 300, 400 children in France, and there's millions of them who are like, so yeah, I would love that. And I saw Lisa, assenting to this, and others, and like, I'm not the best person, but I would totally encourage to create spaces where we can also talk about the difficulty and the pain and the moments where we're disheartened, right? And other people who are at a different stage at that moment, can help us. And what I've clearly learned with climate is that, we shouldn't wish the grief away, or we shouldn't wish the pain away. So if anybody goes like, okay, but let's just re-energize you, Bianca, let's come on, but look at the right side, it's not going to work, right? So can we create those spaces where we go through these moments of pain and being disheartened, and so that we re-emerge on the other side with deeper perspectives, or new perspectives, or new things we care about. So if anybody feels called to create those spaces, it sounds amazing to me.
Yeah, I feel like something's already forming in the chat window. I'm receiving like the chat comments. So I'd love to maybe co-create that space with others. Yeah.
I mean, again, if we look at this as sort of like this big historic shift, like, I mean, how could it not, how could it be easy or linear, right? Like, I'm mindful of everyone's time, and I'm just want to offer a space maybe for Lisa or Ria to close, because you were at the start of this, and it feels right to me that you would close, or Elena or Catalina.
Thank you. Lisa, you want to go first?
No, why don't you go first, seeing as you jumped in first?
Yeah. Okay. Do you hear me?
Yes.
I don't see myself, but okay. No, Fred. We just I personally want to thank you for the invitation to co-create this birthday surprise, and also to celebrate a book that has touched my life and many of the people I know, and many of the people who are here who have been connected in one way or the other. I think it made the world smaller. It made me feel connected, especially during the pandemic, when this actually, when the Teal Around the World actually was conceived, right? It just felt like we're not trapped in our own homes when there was actually shelter in place. And I'm very grateful for that. And I've learned so much from the journey. There's still a lot more to learn constantly every day, especially the provocative questions, right? How do you manage pre-existing structures and shifting that? Because people technically need to transition. We don't leapfrog overnight and change into something else. So I think this is where I'm learning also that shift is, something about the ecosystem to build that psychological safety. So Bianca, thank you so much for sharing your vulnerability. I have seen this and I have experienced this sometimes the frustration of shifting age-old traditions into something fresh and new. And this is really a gift, Fred, to have a community that rallies behind the book and are inspired by the book to make a shift for the world. And I'm very grateful for that. So thank you for this invitation.
Thanks, Rhea. Yeah, if I can just add some final words, I'm also so touched and so grateful by what you shared, Bianca, because I think sometimes when we share these stories out there in the world, it can seem like, oh, it's easy. How hard can it be? Or it can seem like a utopia. And there are so many wonderful things happening. But yeah, as we've already mentioned, it is painful and challenging and confronting, and it's very vulnerable. And, you know, it's all of those things together. And I think sometimes the most challenging thing can be when you feel alone with that, or when you feel like I'm the only one who's feeling this. Everyone else seems to be getting along fine. Self-management's flying over there. Must be something wrong with me. And so I really want to offer this to this community. For anyone that's listening, you know, you're not alone. And we're all on this journey in different places, in different moments, and it's not linear. And I really know from experience that when you reach out to people in this community, there's so much abundance and generosity. You know, pick any one person in this call today, message them on LinkedIn or somewhere. I guarantee they'll happily give you their time and share knowledge and experiences and connections. You know, that's for me been the most rewarding thing about this community. So we have the Miro board now. We're going to harvest all of the wonderful stuff that you've been sharing in the chat. All of you, thank you for those sharings, links and resources. We're going to share the recording of this, which has been streaming onto YouTube. So when that's finished, we'll share that with everyone. So there are so many gems in this event, and I'm just so grateful for everyone who showed up here on Zoom, or who tuned into the YouTube live stream, or who created an in-person event, or is still has organized an event that's yet to happen. You know, this movement is what it is because of every single one of you. So thank you. And thank you, Fred, for being the catalyst of this, because you have changed my life, and I know so many people's lives here. So yeah, I'm just feeling extremely grateful right now.
Same here. See you all in 10 years, and hopefully, you know, much before then.
God bless, Larry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Everybody.
Gracias.
Everybody.
Bye. Bye.
Many more.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye. See you in 10 years and in between.
Before.